So I thought I'd open the floor to questions and answers. If you have any answers, I'd appreciate hearing them.
Thank you so much for stopping by. This is just really great.
Ajahn? When Ajahn Dick was here, he spoke a little bit on the nature of the mind in regards to letting go, and how when we think we're letting go, we often, the mind just grabs something else. And I was wondering if you could speak a little on that, maybe flesh it out.
It was one of Ginana Yon's points of recommendation, which is whenever you have an insight, always be careful to see what happens next. Because the mind does have that tendency. I have had a great insight. And John Lee's recommendation is whenever you have an insight, ask yourself, to what extent is the opposite true? Because if you have an insight, it may be right for one particular set of circumstances, but not necessarily across the board. But the mind has this tendency, especially if you've been getting into good concentration, that it sees one thing and it seems to think that it applies to everything. So you have to ask yourself, where is the opposite true? And that way you sort of catch yourself. I think you probably know the story of Ajahn Mahabua when Ajahn Mun passed away. He was wondering, where am I going to go now for help? Now that Ajahn Mun is no longer alive. Then he stopped to think, what did he teach me when he was alive? And one of the most important things he remembered was that when something comes up in your meditation that you're not 100% sure that it's safe or not, just go back to the sense of the knower and let it pass. And that way you stay safe. So you don't just jump on and say, this must be it. That's actually listed as one of the defilements of insight, is your confidence that what you've got must be the real thing. So you have to I said, whatever's happening, I'm just going to watch it. See what happens next.
Ajahn, do you have any advice on how to balance study in a way that supports the practice?
Balance what?
Balance study.
Okay, I've found in my own case that there are periods when I want to read, and I'm just kind of devouring things to read. And then you get to a point where you realize, okay, I don't know what I'm reading about, in which case I better practice. And then for that there'll be a period when you don't want to read at all. You just want to do the practice. And then you run up against another problem. And it's time to read again. So it's not like you do a steady diet of 50%, 50%. Sometimes it'll be 100% practice and 0 reading, and sometimes, you should always have some practice. But the amount of reading you do will depend on the problems that are coming up. Whether you feel you need some explanation on that.
Maybe related to that question, like when you are, say, doing research for one of your books, like say Buddhist Romanticism, there are so many, facts that you're pulling in for that. Will you actually be taking notes, or do you?
Of course, those would all fall out of my brain.
And do you have a system? Do you have like multiple notebooks, or is it?
I just have sheets of paper, and I just scribble on the sheets of paper, and then I look at it and say, okay, how do these things fit together? I try to let the main points organize themselves. And sometimes, if there are a lot of points, you get a bigger sheet of paper. No, literally. You want to see everything all at once, so that you're going to be which is the subordinate idea, and which is the more important idea. There are 3 books that really got ate into my meditation. One was the Buddhist Monastic Code, more than anything else, because that required that you keep all these different details in your mind all at once. And I remember when I was working on Sangha Sesa 1, I kept thinking, I hope Ajahn Sawat cannot read my mind. That and Buddhist Romanticism, and then when I was doing the Buddhist religions, that required a lot of organization, keeping a lot of things in mind all at once. But the ones the writing projects that I felt were most useful in my practice were the ones that were most directly related to Dhamma. So once I had those books out of the way, then I could focus more on things that were really more relevant to the practice. But don't write any books until your teacher says you're ready to. Okay?
What about the 10-page papers?
Stay away from writing. You know, if Ajahn Fuang and Ajahn Swat hadn't told me to write, I wouldn't have done it.
Do you find that it I mean, I do find it actually helps me, if I'm just doing it for myself, actually will help me.
Yeah, as I said, you can write as much as you want, but don't print.
As Westerners, we tend to be a bit hard on ourselves sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a balance between, like I can remember as a junior monk being very hard on myself, but in a way that saps my vitality.
Mm-hmm.
Or like sometimes, but then if you don't put any pressure on yourself, is there some sort of balance there?
Well, you have to learn how to train your critical voice. I mean, so much has been written about how bad the critical voice is and how much it destroys our happiness. But if it's an unskillful critical voice, yes, you've got to do something about it. But without a skillful critical voice, you don't go anywhere. And so a lot of that lies in training. And so when you're being hard on yourself, ask the critical voice, okay, how are you going to help me? If you can't give anything constructive, I don't want to talk to you. Because you have to think about when the voices are coming up. Okay, exactly whose voice is this? When I was first practicing in Thailand, I had a lot of time by myself. And there were a lot of voices coming up saying, you shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing something that's more useful to society, and all kinds of things. So I began to list, okay, is this something I picked up from my mother, or from school, or from the media, or from my parents, or whatever. And then when I could identify, okay, this is an opinion I picked up from so-and-so, how much does that person know? And then I began to realize, okay, there's a lot of stuff I was carrying around in terms of what the critical voice would say that was based on nothing. No knowledge at all, but just opinion. And that helped see through it. But as the Buddha said, for the Dharma to grow in you, you have to be one, committed, and two, you have to reflect. And so the reflection is the important part of how to train that voice to be skillful.
Okay. Sometimes I see you see things in the sutras like, a thought of lust arises. He destroys it, obliterates it,
Mm-hmm.
wipes it out of existence,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So we see that kind of language sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and think then it gets pretty grim.
Well, the Buddha says you have to learn how to delight in destroying. Say, gotcha. And then, of course, once you think you've got it, then it's going to come back and get you from some other thing, but some other side. But you have to find some pleasure in, okay, this particular mind state has been controlling my life for who knows how many lifetimes. And if I can at least work my way through a little bit, take delight in that.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of things, if you don't understand it, of course you're not going to destroy it, so you have to watch it for a while. But in watching it, again, you have to be careful about it. Say, well, let me see that for 5 moments more so I can watch it more carefully. Let me see it again. Let me see it again. After a while, it's eaten you up. So you have to, again, it's a matter of learning how to train that critical voice, so it really is helpful. Debbie, how's your practice going?
Currently it's more service with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of my dad a lot of time now.
Mm-hmm.
So that part's been really fruitful though. Really heart-opening.
Mm-hmm.
And getting over the resistance of not being able to be where I want to be.
Well, I was Ajahn Fuang's attendant for 6 years. And there was a lot of that. It always seemed that he was getting sick at really inappropriate times. Just when I had something else I wanted to do, and then he got his sickness. So you've got to learn how to see, how can I stay with my breath? How can I stay with a sense of awareness while I'm dealing with this? And being with the Ajahn, of course, he made it a part of a Dharma training. I don't know if your father's doing that for you, but you can make it a Dharma training yourself.
Yeah, I have to do it myself, I think. But, it's good. It's there. It's because it's also dealing with family, and that's always good for...
Well, it's not that much different from being an attendant, because when you're the Ajahns attendant, a lot of people say, well, he should be eating this, he should be taking this medicine, doing this, doing that. And then I tried it once when one of the lay people recommended something, and I really got criticized by Ajahn Fuang very sternly. Mm-hmm. So from that point on, okay, whatever he wants, I will do it, and I'm not listening to anybody else. Mm-hmm. And you get a lot of flack that way. And you have to just say, okay, just let it roll off your back.
Well, it's interesting too because I'm, right now my brother's with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I know my brother does things a little bit differently. We communicate, we cross, so we can kind of have the same standard, but I have to let go of how he does it because he'll do it his way. Mm-hmm. But my dad's still in good hands.
Mm-hmm. At least you have somebody spelling you. I didn't.
Sometimes we hear, I've asked this question a couple times recently, but sometimes we hear the Satipatthana used as the one path,
mm-hmm.
but then it seems more to me it's the path that leads in one direction,
mm-hmm.
and that there's other valid modes, like the 5 powers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you maybe speak on that.
You just explained it.
Okay. Thank you.
No, I mean the word ekaya for a long time was translated as the only way, and then they discovered there's another use of the word in the canon, which is more idiomatic, whereas you see someone on a path that's going to one destination,
Yeah.
and you know that if he doesn't get off that path, he's going to end up at that destination.
Yeah.
So now we know what the idiomatic use of the term is, and it's a lot easier to understand than when it's used in a more abstract context like that. Then, of course, there's the teaching that Satipatthana practice is one thing and concentration practice is something else, and I've never seen the Buddha say that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, Satipatthana, the instructions for mindfulness are basically the Buddha's instructions for how to get into concentration. You're holding one topic in mind, putting aside all thoughts about the world, and you're ardent, alert, mindful. I mean, that's how you get into concentration. So think of the description of right mindfulness as the recipe, and the descriptions of the 4 stages of jhana are the restaurant review. This is what it's supposed to taste like.
I was reading something from the suttas, and I think the Pali phrase, it's translated in different ways, but I think it's Ceto Vimutti, Panya Vimutti, and it will come up, they kind of come up together in different places. And I think this one was in Wings to Awakening, and it was a passage about restraint of the faculties, the sense faculties. And it was something like the monk understands and practices sense restraint, and he has awareness release and insight release, possibly how you put it. Anyway, I've heard people say in some places that those are kind of 2 different things or refer to different aspects of liberation, but then they're often or quite often they're together in the suttas. And I was just wondering if you could kind of flesh out a little bit what those mean and how they function in different passages in the sutras.
Okay. In some cases, Ceto Vimutti is on its own, as describing the concentration practice, like with the 4 Brahma Viharas. And there's a place where the Buddha defines Ceto Vimutti, or awareness release, as what gets rid of passion, and then Panya Vimutti, discernment release, is what gets rid of ignorance. And so, of course, for the Arahant, he or she has gotten rid of both, which is why they say that the Arahant has experienced or seen both of these kinds of release.
Would that be liberation in both ways?
Liberation in both ways has more to do with having not only the jhanas, but also the formless attainments. If you were to just with discernment release, then it would be basically the, having any one of the jhanas and having gone straight to release from there.
So then possibly like with another noble attainment that's not like below arahatship, like anagami or sakadagami, it could be that they have awareness release and that some of the passion and aversion have been reduced or eliminated, but still there's ignorance.
Still there's some ignorance, yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Wonder if you have advice, guidance for our 3 candidates who are going to be ordaining tomorrow. Things to watch out for.
Things to watch out for. Well, the Buddha gave the best advice for a new monk, which is one, observe the precepts. And know your precepts as thoroughly as you can. I was once told when I was first getting ordained, it doesn't matter how much you know about the suttas, but you really got to know the Vinaya. So that you're confident in the fact, okay, you know what the rules are, you know what your behavior is, and you can compare the two without having a lot of doubts and uncertainty about it. Secondly, moderation in conversation. John Fung used to say, if something is not necessary, don't say it. And he learned that lesson, and his standards of what's not necessary were really strict. There was one time I was discussing something with another young monk, and I was saying, well, I think it's like this. And he happened to be walking past, and he said, if you don't know, don't say it. And later he told me the story when he was up in northern Thailand with another monk, and they were on their arms around one day. And the layperson putting food in the other monk's bowl asked the other monk a question, and the monk answered. And Ajahn Geoff was thinking to himself, it really wasn't necessary to answer that question. And then later in the day, that monk got a severe case of diarrhea. And he said, oh, okay, that's the connection. So, moderation in conversation, restraint of the senses. When you're looking, remember the forest tradition basically has one of its distinctive teachings is that we're not just on the passive, playing a passive role where outside stimuli come in and then we respond or react. We're out there looking for things that will satisfy our greed or our aversion or our delusion or whatever is going through the mind. And so we have to be very careful. When you're looking, who's doing the looking? I don't know if you read John Lee's piece on consciousness, where he talks about all the beings that are around you, or in you, all the worms in your bloodstream. Sometimes they go through your brain and they drop off a thought and they come back out. And so you have to ask, is this the thought of a worm or is this the thought of a human being? And so you have to look at, just the simple act of looking, you have to ask, okay, why am I looking? And then when I do look in that particular way, what's the result? What impact is this having on my mind? And if you see it's having a bad impact, you've got to go back and look in a different way. It's not that you have to have blinders on all the time, but just be very careful why you're looking, what your purpose is. It's restraining the senses. Fourth is seclusion, trying to find a lot of time to develop physical seclusion and mental seclusion. And then the fifth is making sure you have right view. When you're suffering, it's not because of Ajahn Geoff or Ajahn Yaniko or the lay people or whatever. It's because something's wrong inside your mind. You've got to look for that. And if you can keep these things in mind, okay, then it's going to you create the environment for your practice by your behavior.
Ajahn, are you on a time constraint? Did you want to leave by a certain time? Or?
I was going to leave by 3:30.
By 3:30?
So we've got some time.
Okay.
But if you run out of questions, I'll leave earlier.
Okay. Well, my other question is, did you want a tour of the monastery?
No, it's okay. I've seen the monastery.
Okay. We'll keep asking questions.
When we visited Chithurst years back, we'd written a letter to Ajahn Sumedho asking if we could stop by. And he responded, but by the time his letter got to us in Thailand, we had already left Thailand. And so we arrived in England and not sure whether we could go and visit them or not. So we're actually staying in a little hotel in London. And Ajahn Geoff got up early that morning, was meditating, came out of his meditation. And, I knew he had a lot of psychic abilities, but he was very quiet about them. But that one day he said, "Do they have a pond there at Chithurst?" I said, "Yes." He said, "There's a naga in the pond. Let's go check it out." And so we show up. And Ajahn Sumedho welcomes us, and he takes us into their little meeting room and offers to show us around the house. And Ajahn Geoff says, "No, I want to see the pond." So we walk down to the pond. And he looks at it for a minute, and he turns to Ajahn Sumedho and says, "If you want this place to prosper, build an ordination hall here." Then turns around, gets back in the car, and leaves. And apparently they still talk about this. The Thai Ajahn shows up and tells him to build an ordination hall there, and goes away.
Did they do it?
No.
Not at the pond.
No. Well, at that point they didn't know about Amaravati. Once they got involved with Amaravati, then all their energy went that direction.
Anything we should know here?
It was sad seeing all the damage of the fire.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tanata.
Mm-hmm.
We have our 3-month monastic winter retreat coming up, and I find for myself by the 3rd month, I start to, I've kind of applied myself to practice the meditation in as many ways as I can, and things start to, I start to kind of lose interest, I guess, and then so then kind of distraction can kind of come up, and other things can be very appealing. Do you have any suggestions on how I can kind of approach the practice?
About that? Well, give yourself maybe an hour a day for something else besides the meditation. So you can get out of it and then come back into it with fresh eyes. And something that doesn't eat into your meditation. Just have a little project, it might be a memorization project or something that just gives you some variety. Try alternative methods. Have a home base, which I recommend be the breath. But then also you do body contemplation, Brahma Viharas, recollection of the Buddha. What will you all be reading this retreat?
Not a plan.
Okay.
I've got some ideas. Ajahn Geoff will be away, and Longpa Asano will be away for the first month, so just starting to gel some ideas for what we want the theme of the retreat to be. Maybe one year, many years ago, we focused on the 4th Satipatthana, going through all those sections and finding sutta readings and having discussions, and I'm thinking that it's been probably 15 years since we did that, and it was very fruitful, so thinking about all of those themes of the 4th Satipatthana, the possibility.
Someone once recommended pointed out that a lot of the scholarly traditions in Asia focus on 2 topics, basically, on the Wings to Awakening and the 4th Satipatthana.
So, auspicious.
You can do both.
Sounds like a go. Yeah. Kind of along those lines, Tanachan, since I stepped down from most of my administrative type duties a couple of years ago, still trying to find a balance now, my advancing years, how to spend, what's the most fruitful way to spend the latter part of one's life in the monastic form, now that I have freedom to kind of explore different modes of participating and non-participating, and find that I enjoy both, extended periods of solitude where I can just focus on more of the formal practice, reading, studying, contemplating those things, but also engaging with the community, helping to support, the growth of the community and people who are coming on, and then just helping to maintain the monastery and get a lot of delight out of that as well. But, I guess sometimes I still have these little questions about how to find that balance. What's the most important thing at the age of 67 now? And who knows how much
The most
longer.
important thing is you could die at any time, so. So you have to think about, okay, given the fact that I could die at any time, what do I want to look back on having done?
Yeah.
And you'll find it is not just the meditation. I mean, the fact that you are now, one of the elders of the Sangha, you have something to share. And the meditation ensures that what you share is worth sharing, but you do want to share it as well.
Yeah.
In administration, you can leave to somebody else.
That's been my goal.
Yeah.
Kind of let that pass on, but
Yeah.
But finding that balance between sharing and helping, helping other people along versus, is that coming from a clean enough place for now? Do I really think I need to go back and spend some more time, drumming up inside?
And one of the things you do is just kind of look around and see anything that needs to be cleaned up, and start cleaning it up until the junior monks get embarrassed and start cleaning up for you. I mean, that was how John Fuhn taught me. He'd pick this up and he'd pick that up, and I said, I can't let him do that, so I've got to do it myself.
For myself, returning to Thailand and the possibility of possibly, one period being 6 weeks of solitude, just going Pindapat each day, and having most likely a lot of time for sitting and walking meditation, just general advice for solitude and retreat, and being completely on my own.
Well, so again, it's the voice of the critic inside. You have to make sure that it doesn't start getting overwhelming and negative and destructive.
God.
There's a tendency for people alone like that to start getting obsessed about something.
God.
So you have to keep questioning your obsessions. This is really helpful. And how you can pull yourself out of a mind state is one of the most important skills you're going to need as a monk.
God. That's happened to me before.
Yeah.
When I was doing some cave practice before, just a month or so of solitude. It's like I actually started making a list of all the ways I could improve the cave, and then at the end of the retreat, it was completely meaningless. It didn't even make sense, actually.
Yep. So we'll remember that.
Tanaja, I'm getting a theme of inquiry, a lot of this skillful inquiry, asking skillful questions, like you said, with letting go and grabbing another thing. It's almost scientific in the way that, what was the result of that? And how could this be disproved? In what way would this not be true? And I found that very skillful. But how can we strengthen or hone that skill of inquiry?
Okay. Well, there's a book called Skill and Questions, and I went through and focused on these are the questions that the Buddha recommends that you ask yourself. These are the questions he recommends that you not ask yourself. Just look those over and get an idea. I noticed, the generation, John Cha, John Lee, people like that, there was something about their minds that was a little bit tricky. They had learned to ask questions from different sides and different angles, and that you wouldn't expect. And you have to develop that quality as much as you can. So one thing you would think about, if John Cha were here right now, what questions would he ask me? And it wouldn't be just let go. What questions would he have me ask? There is this tendency we have to reduce the Ajahns to a soundbite, which is unfortunate. Ajahn Mahaprabhu is all about fighting the defilements, and Ajahn Cha is all about letting go. But you actually look into stories about their lives. It's not the case. There was this time when the king of Thailand had two other Ajahns and Ajahn Chah come for a meal at the palace. And the students were rebelling against the military at the time. And they were both asking the king to side with them, and the king was kind of caught between the two. And so he asked the different Ajahns after the meal, what should he do? And the first two Ajahns basically said, develop equanimity. He got to Ajahn Chah, and Ajahn Chah said, well, equanimity is good, but it's got to have discernment right as well. So you don't just let go, you have to let go wisely. And it was that ability to check themselves. I mean, that's why they were good Ajahns. I mean, they lived out in the forest. Ajahn Mun would have problems, of course, with devas coming and telling him to do this and do that. And if he'd believed all the devas, he would have gone crazy. Really. So this is one of the lessons I learned from Ajahn Fuang, was that you gain an insight and you have to ask yourself, okay, how does this fit in with the Dharma that I know? And if it seems to fit in, okay, then you say, what happens when I actually give it a try? And watch, okay, what does actually happen to your mind? Does it improve? Does it not improve? Just because a deva says it doesn't mean it's true. Just because you have an insight while you're in concentration doesn't mean it's true. You have to test it. And the more you can think about it, looking from different sides. I mean, both Ajahn Chah and Ajahn, they have their talks about how it's not the case that everything is inconstant or impermanent. There are things that are permanent, there are things that are constant. But they have to be let go too. As the Ajahns are saying, I try to prove the Buddha wrong.
Ajahn, do you have any advice for practicing with a very idealistic mind, constantly trying to formulate what to do, how one should be, ought to be, even though hearing over and over and seeing slightly that it's not effective? It seems to be like my default tendency is always wanting to put everything in a box.
Okay. Let them out of the box. But no, you have to realize that and being idealistic is not all bad. It's just going to learn how do we be idealistic in a skillful way? What are the ideals that I'm working towards, and how do you gain success by approximation? It's not an all or nothing kind of thing. I mean, that's the problem with some ideals. If I don't have 100% the ideal that I want, then it's not good at all, and you drop it. You have to, 50% is heading in the right direction. 60%, 70%, you're heading in the right direction. You have to realize that we all start out wrong. And our understanding of what's going to happen in the practice is going to be wrong from the beginning, because we're coming from ignorance. Say, okay, once you admit, okay, hey, I'm ignorant, I've got to learn. How do you go about learning? And if you can develop your pride around the fact, okay, I'm always willing to learn. If you're going to have any pride, be proud about that. That'll help you. When I went to stay with Ajahn Fuang the first time, here I was a hotshot. I graduated with honors from college, and I thought I was pretty smart. And it was Ajahn Fuang's main goal was to teach me how stupid I was. And he did a good job. Until I was ready to say, yeah, I don't know. And again. And also learn how to laugh at yourself in a good-natured way. That's how you survive. There was one time when he was sick, and his illness was strange. He'd get these attacks of rheumatoid psoriasis, and he needed somebody to massage him deep into the bone, which I couldn't do. And there was this one monk who could, but he had some issues with Ajahn Fuang, so he could let Ajahn Fuang suffer for 3 days, and then he would come. In the meantime, I was up all night with Ajahn Fuang, giving him hot compresses and doing all the things I could do. And so one time, the monk showed up around 10 p.m. And the treatment lasted until midnight, and then he was feeling a lot better. And he turned to me and he asked, "Café Chon?" A cup of coffee, a spoon of coffee. A spoon of coffee? What a spoon of coffee? And so I went down to the kitchen, found somebody there, and I said, Ajahn Geoff wants a spoon of coffee. And they said, well, does he want it mixed, or already mixed, or you just want the powder? And I said, well, I guess he wants it mixed, I don't know. And so I finally get back to his hut and I realized, oh, he wanted a chong cafe, coffee spoon. And so he started laughing. He says, what are you laughing about? And I said, you wanted a coffee spoon, right? Yes. Well, I heard you say you wanted a spoon of coffee. And he didn't say anything. And I found out later that he was laughing and laughing about this with some of his other students and saying, he probably did say it, he was tired from 3 nights up and not being able to sleep. He probably did say a spoon of coffee, and I was the straight arrow dumb time who would just get him a spoon of coffee. So but being able to laugh got me through that. There was another time though when that same monk came about 8 o'clock, finished the massage around 10. And Ajahn Geoff hadn't eaten for 3 days. And those were back in the days when we thought that cheese was okay in the evening, so the lay people got some cheese and cocoa and brought it out. And the monk's sitting there saying, I really feel sorry for you, Ajahn, because you're here and nobody look after you except for this Western monk who sometimes understands what you say and sometimes doesn't understand what you say. And I said, come on, I'm the one who's been out for 3 nights. I didn't say anything. And then Ajahn Geoff asked for some tissue. And the word for tissue in Thai is godan, the word for cheese is nai. And so the other monk offers him the cheese. I offer him the tissue. And he turns to the monk and says, you can take that cheese and do what you want with that, I want a tissue. I was high for 3 days. So have ideals, but learn how to wear them lightly. And also make sure that your critical voice is constructive and not destructive. Anything else?
So a while ago, I heard someone who made a adhitthana to stick with Buddha. It's like a lifetime meditation word. I was like, that seems like a good idea. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to take that on. And then I found for a number of months, there's been just a 10-syllable kind of Mahayana mantra that my mind just really enjoys. I seem to be able to stay within the body and even do like some contemplation with it. And so there's this sense of like, I should stick with that, like stick with Buddha, stick with the adhitthana. He said, you're going to do this, the mind that says I need to stick with that. But then there's also this aspect of, there's this new, this other thing that the mind seems to really like. And it's also outside of kind of traditional meditation objects. So that idea of, if you have any advice on sticking with the original adhitthana, or sticking with something that seems to be working that the mind likes over a longer period of time, and also the idea of working with meditation objects that are kind of outside the normal.
Okay, I would say that your mind, to get concentration, is going to need to find something it likes. It's not just going to stay with things that, just because you said, I'm going to do this, I got to stick with this, come hell or high water. This is one of the areas of the practice where you really do have to allow your likes and dislikes to make a difference. And my mind likes this, it sticks with this, it's getting good results. The Buddha has those 4 qualities that go into a good adhitthana. The first is discernment, which means choosing a good goal and then choosing good means to that goal. But discernment also means reflecting. Are the means leading to the goal that I wanted to? You stick to the goal. The goal is awakening. Now, how you're going to get there, you can't tell before. As I was saying to the other Anagarika, you're coming from ignorance. You're making an adhitthana out of ignorance. So if it's not working, you're going to change. You're keeping to the goal. It's just a question of how to get there. That's going to have to change with time. So you gotta learn how to read your mind. Now, as far as whether it's a Mahayana mantra or as long as it's not, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a miserable sinner.
I don't think anybody here is doing that.
No. There was when I was here in 2007, and John Basana one day said, let's go over and check out the monastery next door.
Oh,
So we go over, and we happen to be there for their noon service, which is where they're repeating the Jesus prayer over and over and over and over again. Now, I must admit, I have some pretty negative connotation, experiences with Christianity. And so it said, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a miserable sinner, over and over and over again. And as we left, John Basana told me, isn't their faith inspiring? I said, I was climbing the walls. So as long as the Mahayana thing is not telling you something weird. What is it?
That's a Om Ha 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 with some nice words. The Jizo, like a Jizo Bodhisattva mantra, Urso Bodhisattva mantra, just simple 10 syllables. And it doesn't seem to be a lot of proliferation with it. It seems to just.
Okay, as long as it calms your mind, that's fine.
John, on the subject of meditation objects, I found for myself two of my main objects would be breath and like body contemplation or stupa. Would you say is it correct in that if you're moving to a different object, as long as there is like an element of mindfulness and you're conscious of kind of what the object is, and that's what you need to look for. So you don't have to say like be with the breath or with Buddha all the time. It's okay to kind of to move around as it seems appropriate.
Yes, you do it as long as you do it mindfully. Yes. Yeah.
Upasakagi, I was wondering if you ever met Upasakagi or your process of taking on the translation and just reflections on her.
I first knew her as a poet. And that's how she was originally known around town. And she would print these books of Dharma poetry. And then I came across some of her Dharma talks, and I really liked them. I find them inspiring. And there's this tradition, John Lee said, there's this woman in Radpuri who's a non-returner. It was her. So they go, she must be pretty good. And then someone gave me a book that they had done translating some of her talks, and the translations were pretty awful. So I was able to find the originals of those translations, retranslated the talks. So that's how I got started. There was a French monk who used to go to what Bananachai, Titiano. He just wrote a little bit. But he went to all the meditation monasteries around Thailand. And so I'd gone to her place one time. And so he's there having Q&A, and he asked her, and he was thinking about doing kasina practice in Thai. That means basically staring at a kasina. And she said, stare at your mind. The other story I like about her was that the word had gotten to among some of the forest tradition, and there was this woman who led a women's community in Radpuri who they were not bowing down to monks. So he decided to go check out, and Ajahn Mahaprabhu decided to go check out what was going on. So he arrives there, and she invites him to give a Dharma talk. And here is Ajahn Mahaprabhu giving a Dharma talk. And when he's done, she turns to me and says, what he said is 100% right. And so Ajahn Mahaprabhu came back and he said, it's not that she's not bowing down to monks, she's bowing down to the monks she should be bowing down to.
I'm curious if you could give any advice on how to relate to this principle of like seeing, right view, on an intellectual level, but then not doing that thing of holding the view, only this is true and everything else is wrong.
Okay, holding the view only this is view, everything else is wrong, that's getting ready to get into arguments. You're not holding right view to get into arguments. You're holding right view because it's therapeutic for your mind. I once had an exchange with Bhikkhu Bodhi one time, and he was saying, Buddhism is not just a therapy, it's a philosophy. So I said, no, you've got it wrong. It's not just a philosophy, it's a therapy. These views are meant for you to use to treat your mind. Once you can set up and say, only this is right, everything else is wrong, you're getting ready to argue with other people. And that's not what the views are meant for. I mean, if you have the view, the world is finite, and the world is infinite, it's the type of view that's inviting debate. The fact that you are suffering through your own craving and clinging, that's not set for debate. It's meant to therapy for you to use in your own mind and take care of your own suffering.
And how do you translate that advice to Mahamogamana, that I will not utter words which are contentious or disputatious, or?
Okay, well, he probably knew that. I think it was Mahagassapa. Yeah, and he knew the type of person Mahagassapa was. I mean, because the Buddha did get into debates, and we also sometimes see Mahakachana get into debates.
Right.
So it's not the case that debate is wrong. When the Buddha's getting into debate, you want to make sure the person really is looking for the truth, and they're not just there for the sake of debate. Either that, or the people who are watching need to be taught a lesson. So be careful once you start getting into debates. Why are you doing this? Who are you trying to help? Can you really help this? If it's just debate for the sake of debate, don't do it.
Off of that, I find my mind really inclines towards the study of Pali, but I'm wondering if your thoughts on if you found it useful for the sort of establishing of right view over long-term practice to have that kind of internally consistent system, while terms have a second.
Well, I find it useful just so I could know the Pali passages, on my own. I must admit the translations that were available when I started studying Pali were pretty bad. And so I said, I want to get back to the original. And A.K. Warder had just come out with his book, which really opened up a new light on the Pali and the canon. Because prior to that time, Pali was taught as, the standard for Pali was the Pali of the commentaries. And then the canon had this weird way of doing things. And so A.K. Warder said, no, we're going to start studying the Pali of the canon and see what's that like on its own terms. And I found his book to be very intuitive. And once you've got some Pali under your belt, then the next question is, okay, what's an issue that I'm really interested in, and read up on that. But
you read up on it in
the sutras, and then look at the original Pali and see what you find. But that might be one of if you're going to be doing a meditation all day, so give yourself an hour, okay, study Pali for an hour. And then put it down.
That's the hard part.
Yeah. Basic good concentration practice. You've got to learn how to cut through your thoughts. Because his ability to step out, as I was saying to you, the ability to step out of your thought worlds is what's going to save you.
I haven't read that many suttas, but I think I'm familiar with a lot of concepts just from interacting with Dhamma practitioners. And something I've heard a lot is what you just mentioned, these kind of modes, like Bhunta Mahabua's kind of more direct mode versus Ajahn Chah's more passive mode, so to speak. And I've been wondering how to balance those. And one of the answers that I've received is, it's like skillful means, like you just use whatever's appropriate in the given moment.
Yeah, because Ajahn Mahabua wasn't barking at people all the time. And Ajahn Chah wasn't saying just sort of be passive all the time. Both of them had to balance. And it's a question of what's your right, what's the balance for you. And the Buddha basically said there are two kinds of causes of suffering. The ones that go away when you simply look at them. In other words, they're able to survive in your mind and function in your mind because you're not paying attention. But once you pay attention, you say, well, that's ridiculous, and you drop it. Then there are the other ones where you stare at them and they stare right back. And then they're going to go away easily. And those are the ones where the Buddha says you have to exert a fabrication. Now, the fabrication, there can be bodily fabrication. How are you breathing around this defilement? Verbal fabrication. How are you talking to yourself? Can I change the topic? Can I change the way I'm talking about that topic? And then there's mental fabrication. What are my perceptions? What are the mental images I have? Can I change those? And you can find anger, it survives because one of them, by the way you're breathing. Two, you're talking about what's wrong with that other person. And you can give a really detailed account of where that person has been wrong. Or if you're angry at yourself, you can give a really detailed account of what's wrong with you. And you just ask yourself, okay, is this useful? Is this helpful? Can I talk about this thing to myself in another way and still be talking the truth? And then what are the perceptions I'm holding in my mind? And so you have to have both approaches. The approach is just as we can, just be with things as they are and see through them, and you'll just be able to see through them just as you see them as they come and they go. Others, you really have to exert an effort. And as a good practitioner, you're going to be able to do both. And the Buddha doesn't say which defilements go away when you just look at them and which defilements go away when you work at them. It's going to be an individual matter. But be open to both sides. Any last questions?
Did you ever meet Longpo Jia? And
Yes,
if so,
I did.
do you have any good stories or interactions in terms of the way he trained?
I included a story about Ajahn Geoff in the Ajahn Geoff biography. And Ajahn Geoff never forgave me. So. It was when they both went to see Ajahn Mun for the very first time. And in the middle of the night, Ajahn Geoff comes up to Ajahn Fung is saying, Fuang, wait, now wait, kapandi wa. He's basically saying, Fuang, it's cold, let's go. And the next morning, Ajahn Mun said, you see people who have no persistence, no endurance, go, nobody invited you here. And they both stuck it out. And I included it because they both stuck it out. And Ajahn Geoff didn't like the fact that I exposed a moment of weakness. So. But he was very fierce. He had malaria right before I was ordained. And it was malaria that got into the brain, and that has a real impact. And so after he got out of the hospital, he went to stay at Monastery. It was my first rains retreat there. And so he'd spend the afternoon working at his, he had a blacksmith. But whatever you call it.
Like an anvil.
Like an anvil and a hammer and everything. He'd make these knives and axes, and they're really sharp. And he came out one day, he had a new axe. And he was looking for somebody to show how sharp it was. And he saw me. And so he comes up, shows me the axe, shaves the hair off my arm. And he says, sharp. And I said, yes sir, sharp. But as Ajahn Mahabodhi said, he's gold wrapped up in a rag. So he had his good side. Okay, we're having to go. Come on. Any last questions before I go? Probably be a while before I'm back.
One last question. Any general advice about working with doubt?
Okay, there are two kinds of doubt. There's the doubt that wants to know, and there's the doubt that doesn't want to know. The doubt that wants to know is something you want to cultivate. Because that's what keeps you in the practice. The doubt that doesn't want to know says, I give up, I don't care about this anymore, I just want to run away. That's not going to be good. Or I don't think I can do this. You're not going to know until you try. And you're not going to know, and even if you try, you're not going to know for a long time. So be willing to stick with it. Okay, well.
So,